I think we are.
Thank you for joining. The webinar will begin in a few minutes. Thank you for joining. The webinar will begin in about 1 minute.
All right, I'm going to welcome everyone to today's webinar. Hi, I'm Katie Brooks. I'm the CEO of the Bend Chamber of Commerce, and I thank you all for joining us today. Today, we are focusing our impact webinar on back to school this fall virtually. And we've got some fabulous guests to tell you all about what to expect. But before we get there, I want to thank our sponsors, Bend Broadband. They are helping us bring a 3-part series on education and childcare in our community. And we really couldn't do this without their support. So thanks to Bend Broadband. And they are supporting a 3-part series. And today's the first part. And we all got the news about the beginning of the school year this fall. It's going to be virtual. And it's going to be a challenge for all of us, including the good people who work for our schools and educate our kids, as well as parents, families, and our whole community, frankly. So this will be our first of the 3-part. And then the next is on September 3rd. And we will dive into a conversation about that place between childcare and enhanced educational alternatives, and what's going on in our community as far as what do you do with your children when you got to go to work, when you know they need their education and they're missing their friends, and all the activities that's going on right now in our community as far as resolving this issue, banding together to try and support one another. And we'll have a robust conversation on that on September 3rd. The 3-part series ends with a conversation with Becky Johnson, who is the Vice President of OSU Cascades, and Lori Chesley, who is the President of COCC. They'll be talking about the higher ed component of this. Those who are pursuing their higher ed degrees should expect this fall as well. So that's the 1, 2, 3 series that we'll be bringing to you here in the next few weeks. But today, I want to focus on our fabulous guests, Carrie Douglas, who is the board chair, I believe, for the Bend Alpine School District, and Laura Norquist, who is the interim superintendent of the Bend Alpine School District. They're going to talk a long time, hopefully, in what to expect those first few months of school, first few weeks of school, all the plans they have in place, and they're going to answer your questions today. And afterward, we'll have ample time for Q&A. Bear with us. We try really hard to get to as many questions as we possibly can, and we'll do our best to answer yours. If you do have a question, I know people start weighing in before the presentations are usually done. Down at the bottom of your screen is a Q&A button. That's the one you hit instead of the chat button. Q&A feeds it into a stream for us on this end of the camera to weed through the questions and make sure we get them to Laura and Carrie. So with that, I would like to introduce, I think Carrie, you're up first. Carrie Douglas from our school district board. She's going to kick us off. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Katie. And thanks to everyone for joining today. I know our schedules are busier than ever to talk about our plan for schools and educating our youth this year. Like many of you, I'm here today wearing several hats. And so I want to talk with you for just a moment as a neighbor, someone who's lived here my whole life, and someone who really sees our community suffering right now. Like many of you, I'm a small business owner and a chamber member. My husband Scott and I own 2 local small businesses that are suffering during this time. First from the pandemic, and then compounded because of the childcare crisis that school closures have exacerbated. I get it. I'm a working mother. I'm trying to balance both the health needs, but also the mental and emotional needs of my 2 children during this time, one of whom starts kindergarten in a few weeks. And I'm the chair of the school board, working alongside Laura and her amazing team every day, trying to figure out answers to truly impossible questions. I think that most of us would agree that the federal and state responses to this crisis have been inadequate. And so school districts, working parents, and employers have really been left holding the bag and trying to figure out how to survive during this pandemic. But here we are. I've truly never been more grateful to live in Central Oregon. I've lived here for 40 years, and I've watched this community step up and pivot and innovate and support each other through industry changes, recessions, and other challenges. And I know we'll get through this, but it's truly going to take every one of us stepping up, thinking outside the box, and really prioritizing the greatest needs during a time when we can't possibly meet every need. I also firmly believe that in every crisis lies opportunity. We can either lead out of fear and a feeling of scarcity during this time, or we can lead with hope and empathy and innovation. And I hope that our community chooses the latter, because how our community reacts during this crisis and whether or not we prioritize our most vulnerable community members says a lot about the character of our community. The Bend Alpine School District and all of our Central Oregon school districts obviously face significant challenges. We're being asked to do more with less as we attempt to plan for both high quality distance learning and hopefully a return to in-person school someday soon. And yet it is our responsibility to innovate, to meet the needs of our community, just as our local businesses are, just as so many of you are. We're a large organization, a leading employer in Bend, and that could make pivoting difficult, but it's critical. We're also navigating national and local social unrest in our community in reaction to crimes against people of color and a growing outrage against systemic racism. We see the data locally in recognition that our families of color and families living in poverty are disproportionately impacted by this virus. For many of us, including myself, the virus is an inconvenience, But for many families, the virus and its impact on school closures means that they may have to choose between going to work to put food on the table or staying home to care for their children. And I think we all need to keep in mind that this crisis will likely tip hundreds of local families into homelessness, food insecurity, and other trauma. And those are the families that I think about most as I lay awake at night trying to figure out what our district can do more. But like I said, there are also opportunities. Our board and district leadership has stepped up during this time to actively confront racism in our system through board policies, new goals, the formation of an equity coalition, and reallocating resources. And we're also trying to use this opportunity to completely reimagine what school can be, rather than just trying to get back to a normal that frankly wasn't working for a lot of kids even before the pandemic. This crisis gives us an opportunity to listen to what kids and families are telling us about works and doesn't work, opening up different kinds of collaboration among staff and community, providing more flexibility in student schedules and activities and passions, and focusing teachers on providing feedback that promotes learning rather than just evaluation. We're also trying to innovate with many local partners around the childcare crisis, which Laura will talk more about in a minute. And before I hand it over to Laura, just a few other projects and priorities that we're working on, the projects that don't care that we're in the middle of a pandemic. We are opening a new high school called DARA in the fall of 2021 and working on building, budgeting, programming, and staffing for that, along with multiple other major construction projects, including Pilot Butte Middle School, Amity Magnet Program at Thompson, Juniper Elementary, and High Desert Middle School, among others. And believe it or not, but we're starting another sites and facilities review. Every 5 years we do this, where we evaluate the condition of all of our district facilities and ultimately make recommendations about the need for new schools, additions, and remodels. And finally, we're restarting the hiring process of a permanent superintendent who will begin leading our district as early as July 2021. And with that, I'll hand it over to our fabulous interim superintendent. Laura, you had no idea what you were getting into when you raised your hand with a willingness to lead last fall, but we're incredibly grateful for you. Thanks.
Laura, you need to unmute. Bob, can you help her?
For some reason, it's not letting me unmute either. Down at the very bottom left, there should be a mute button.
Or you can look in your picture frame up on the right side. It'll have mute, unmute. There you go.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. I'm so sorry. How many minutes did that take? Yes, sorry. So before I talk about the specifics and the nuts and bolts of back to school, I just want to reference what Carrie was talking about opportunities to really think about our priorities and reimagine. And as we thought about the world that we're facing and our needs, our district has set some important strategic priorities. So when we think about reimagining school, we really want to focus on engaging and empowering all students and families and making sure their voices are heard and their needs are met. We're focusing on creating safer and more equitable school environments, again, for all students. Ensuring that curricula and instruction are reflective of the diversity of our world and effective for all students. And then finally, recruiting and retaining talented staff who can bring diverse perspectives and experiences to our team. So we have lots of things that we're focusing on starting, but those are the big picture ideas. So we are looking forward to starting on Monday, September 14th. We did push back the start of school 3 days so that our teachers who had expected to go into either a hybrid or all-in model when they learned at the end of July that we'd all be in a distance learning format to start the school year, felt like some additional time to prepare and to have professional development around that model would be helpful to them. So that's why we've altered the start date by a few days. When we start, our students have two options, and one is comprehensive distance learning, and the other is to enroll in a district program called Ben Alpine Schools Online. I'm going to give you a little bit more information about those two programs, but I think the biggest difference is this. If a family's plan is to have your child return to the school when we can open in a balanced hybrid model, then probably comprehensive distance learning is the best option for you. That will keep you connected to your class, your classmates, your teacher, and your school using the curricula that will be used when you physically return to school. If your family's plan is to think about a remote option for a long period of time, then Ben Alpine Schools Online is probably the better option, giving you the most flexibility. Whoops, sorry, I went the wrong way. So we have some key dates that we look at as we're planning for the year ahead. And what we decided to do was to look at our school year in 6-week chunks. And the primary reason for that is, especially at the middle and high school levels, our schedule and our instruction are planned in 6-week chunks. That helps us keep our cohort size down and have students have fewer transitions during a remote learning period. And so to change to a hybrid model would make sense at a 6-week period. And we have a schedule of that as we look at our year ahead. So our first 6-week period begins from the first day and goes through Friday, October 23rd. By Monday, October 12th, we will announce our plan for the second 6 weeks, whether we're able to go to a balanced hybrid model with some or all of our students, or whether we need to stay in comprehensive distance learning for some or all of our students. Many of you are probably aware that there are different metrics for K-3 students and students in grades 4 through 12. For a couple of reasons. One is that the evidence to date, at least, is that K-3 students aren't as seriously impacted. We know they can get COVID-19. We know they can have impacts, but not as seriously impacted. But I think the bigger reason is that there's widespread understanding that the most effective teaching for our youngest learning happens in 3 dimensions, that with an adult working alongside a child who can actually manipulate and move things is the best instructional model. So for our K-3 students, we have county metrics only, and it requires that we have 30 or fewer cases per 100,000, and that our county positivity rate is at 5% or below for 3 weeks prior to opening school. In addition, a school has to have no positive COVID cases among staff or students for 14 days prior. For our grades 4 through 12, the metrics are definitely stricter. That students, or excuse me, the case count per 100,000 has to be 10 or below at the county level. Positivity rate at or below 5%, and then the state positivity rate has to also be at or below 5%. So those are the metrics that we're watching weekly, literally, as we move forward. You may also be aware that the district has probably somewhere around 100 pages of guidelines that we need to meet in order to, both for comprehensive distance learning and for in-person instruction. So quite a lot of planning going into every detail about how we can do our best to keep students and staff safe when they're physically in our buildings. So let me talk just a little about, and again, I want to try to keep this at the 10,000 foot level, about comprehensive distance learning. That is the model that we pivoted to last spring when we had to close our schools. And I want to acknowledge that that was an emergency situation that basically the whole world was thrown into quite suddenly. And we learned a lot about what worked and what didn't work for our students. So we have been working since March to think about how we could improve a remote learning experience for all our students. We thought about, I think one of the things that I would say is consistency, the idea that we have consistent expectations for our teachers. Some of you are parents, and you know, if you had a student with multiple teachers or you had two children in different classrooms, what they were being asked to do and the quality of their experience could have varied tremendously, and that's not acceptable to us. So we have developed standards of practice for all different grade levels that are common. It's not that teaching will look exactly the same, but there are common expectations for every teacher at that grade level in terms of how much time, feedback for students, kinds of activities that students are involved in. So we'll see definitely a more consistent expectation. Another thing we heard loud and clear was the need for consistent platforms. So grades 6 through 12, we are using the learning management system Canvas, and teachers have begun training and putting units onto Canvas. We've had work going on with that all summer long. For K2, it will be the platform Seesaw, and for grades 3-5, Google Classroom. So looking at what was age appropriate and worked best at different levels, but at least across a grade band, not different teachers using different platforms. In comprehensive distance learning, students will have regular opportunities for both live instruction, so WebEx instruction from their teachers, and pre-recorded videos. One of the questions that I've heard a lot about is, well, I'm a working parent. I'm not home till the evening. How can I support my child in that? So when I say opportunities for live instruction, it doesn't mean if the student's not able to attend, we'll be doing things like recording WebExes and giving students who need a more flexible schedule the opportunity to at least experience to some extent what classmates are experiencing. Another thing that we've changed is the definite need for more frequent connections between families and teachers and the school. And that's actually required by the state. So making sure that teachers and schools are making regular check-ins and seeing what flexibility families need to make comprehensive distance learning work for their family. One of the issues that was a struggle last year was that we were required by the state to only assign pass or incomplete grades for students. And we are now able to evaluate students and assign letter grades for courses. And another thing that I would say, this is true actually for both comprehensive distance learning and Ben Alpine schools online, we will have iPads for all students in K-12. Our district had always given iPads for students in grades 3-12, and now it will be for all grades to assist students and families in accessing apps that are important to our youngest students' learning. So talking a little bit about the schedules at the different level. At the elementary level, typically the schedules will follow, be within the confines of what we would think a school day would be like, though again, families have flexibility, but please don't think that means your child is sitting in front of an iPad for 5 or 6 hours. There will be time for teacher-led instruction and then breaks and then teacher-led instruction or a video that a student might watch. So you will have a school day schedule, but it will allow for family flexibility. We'll include things like PE and music and wellness and social emotional learning, interactive science activities as part of that elementary schedule. And then we have applications that give personalized math and reading support as part of the regular school day. For the middle school then, they will have a 7-period schedule, but that will be spread over 2 days. So again, trying to limit maybe the time that students are on the computer, and that, they will have assignments in their class, but actual class meetings will alternate every other day. And one of the things that we thought was really important in this environment is to give each middle school student an advisory teacher. So that will be a primary point of contact between families and school staff. I think that will be really helpful. And we will continue to offer all electives at the middle school. I'm sure they're going to look quite different, as I'm sure you experienced in the spring, but we will continue to offer electives, trying to build a schedule that can transition into a hybrid schedule when we're able to return. At the high school level, students will still take 7 periods as they traditionally have at our comprehensive high schools. But in order to reduce cohort size and I think reduce stress and obligations for students, they will only take 5 of those classes at a time. So many of you, if your student went to Mountain View or Summit or Bend Senior High School, are familiar with their alternating day schedules. They haven't, like a blue, gold, and white day. Essentially, students will be on that 5-period schedule for 6-week periods of time. So they will take 5 classes over 6 weeks and then take the next 5 classes. So in a semester, they will get equal time as they do now with all 7 periods, but that will be spaced over a semester. And again, that was an attempt to, one, reduce stress in an online environment and have fewer points of contact, but also when students return to a balanced hybrid schedule, that keeps cohort sizes down to the level that the state requires. We'll be offering all electives, IB courses, AP courses, dual college credit courses. All those are still part of the program. And again, thinking about those transition years, that there will be additional support for freshmen at all our high schools to help ease that transition when they can't see teachers and classmates in person to start the year. So a little bit about Ben Alpine Schools Online, which is our other option for the year. I think one of the things I do to make a pitch is that I believe that our Ben Alpine Schools Online is equal to any online, if not better than any online charter experience. It is a well-established program. We've offered it for over a decade. Last year alone, we had 4,000 students take 10,000 classes on Ben Alpine Schools Online. So very experienced team that we have supplemented going into this year because we know we have a number of additional families choosing that option. A couple key differences that I want to just emphasize. There is complete flexibility in the schedule on this. I mean, families could say, well, we're doing school on Monday and Tuesday and not the rest of the week, and whatever works for them and their students. There are no live or pre-recorded sessions with teachers in the Ben Alpine Schools Online program. We do have local staff that support the program, but they work more as, I would say, tutors or homeroom teachers. They're not the teacher of record in those courses, but there is a contact with students that's local, certified teachers and classified staff who are working locally to support the program. And the curricula is not our district adopted curricula. It's provided by an outside vendor. One of the areas that we've had many questions about is special programs. Obviously we are continuing the supports that we have always had for special programs. We just have to do it virtually. So we use remote co-teaching models to work with students. We have virtual classes. We have virtual intervention groups, small group instruction. We use telehealth for speech and language services, for occupational therapy, for physical therapy. And as with our general education programs, we learned a great deal this spring, and we are working on standards of practice for our resource teachers and our life skills teachers to do the best we can in a virtual environment. I know I'm only looking at a camera, but I can't look people in the eye and say, Does it feel the same as in-person instruction for some of our students with the greatest needs? No, because it can't, but we will do the best we can to serve every student. One of the things that we're excited about is that the state in its latest guidance really gave some pretty broad parameters for what is called limited in-person instruction. And that gives us the ability to work with students in very small groups for short, no more than 2 hours at a time, no more than a couple times a week. But that as we plan and look forward, we're hopeful that even before our classes open to all students, that we will have some students that we can provide limited in-person instruction for to help serve some of our students better. So we'll have more about that later. Carrie mentioned early on that we are so well aware that some of our families are suffering tremendously during this time. I think we did a good job in the spring. I think the needs will be greater and we need to be more coordinated this fall. And we've been preparing to do that. We have a district team. So we think about the person leading all our fan advocates, our head nurse, the person who oversees counseling service. So we have a district team, and then every school is going to be expected to have a team that the focus of that team is thinking about those families who are really struggling and what kind of outreach can we do and how can we make sure that meals are delivered. We have technology and hotspots for all our students, but we have some students who live so remotely that it doesn't matter if they have a hotspot. So we have to think about how do we get materials to them, or how could we bring them into the schools in limited in-person instruction to make sure they have the access to the technology they need. We used our transportation last year to deliver meals to a number of different areas where people had a difficult time getting to schools. So we anticipate doing that again. We don't know yet exactly where we'll be serving meals, but that really helped our outreach to make sure that families could get food if they needed it. I do want to mention, just as key communicators, I think it would be important for everyone in the chamber to know that the state of Oregon has expanded access to free and reduced lunches. And so the qualifications are more generous for families to apply. So I would encourage families who are listening or in speaking with other families to recognize that even if you haven't qualified in the past, you may qualify now, and encourage people to seek that support. I think one of the greatest fears we have, Carrie talked about the things that keep us up at night, and that thought about students whose mental and emotional health is suffering through prolonged isolation or through family stress, or things happening within a family. And so we have to be very creative to think about how can we serve students and provide that outreach and provide those connections. One of the things, if you read through the 89 pages of state guidance, there's a great deal of emphasis on attending to the social and emotional needs of students and staff, frankly, in a situation like this. Carrie mentioned earlier, I checked my time. I'm doing okay, Katie. Mentioned some of our childcare partnerships. One of the things that we learned last week with the latest ODE guidance is that we can open our schools to our childcare partners to provide childcare in our schools. And of course, they have to meet all the regulations associated with that and thinking about being in our schools. But we have been in conversation since then with both Bend Park and Rec and with the Boys and Girls Club about opportunities at their sites. Boys and Girls Club has a site, but with Park and Rec, to provide programming during comprehensive distance learning and hybrid instruction, because students would only be in school 2 or 3 days a week in hybrid instruction. And they are working on those plans now. One of the things Katie mentioned in talking about your program coming up with some of the innovative solutions, we have been working with Better Together and the Child Care Task Force, because one of our big priorities is to try to ensure that the families who need childcare the most, as Carrie said, choosing between going to work and feeding your family. Going to work and feeding your family or staying home and taking care of your children. We know we have, hundreds of families in that situation. And so can we, accelerate the number of scholarships that students could qualify for in both the Park and Rec departments, Park and Rec programs and Boys and Girls Club. We also plan to support them with academic support, that we can use some of our own staff to help with kind of the tutoring and learning coaching during some designated periods of the day. So they can do what they're expert at, and we can support them in some of the things that we have expertise in. And then I wanted to, this chart, I'm not a chart expert, but someone had asked the question, well, what do you do if there's an outbreak? Well, we definitely have thought about that. This was actually a chart built by the Oregon Nurses Association. And we are required in our plan to have, once we return to balanced hybrid instruction or all-in instruction, or even if our staff is there without students, there are a number of different things that can happen in terms of a case or an outbreak. And so we have very strict requirements about what happens and how we communicate about that. I do want to stress this is a general guideline, but we work side by side with the Deschutes County Public Health. We have an excellent relationship with them, and they're rock stars in terms of helping to give us advice, because there's some individualized circumstances and situations. And we also have an amazing team of healthcare professionals here in the region who have provided advice and continue to provide advice as we think about, what is safe, what feels safe, what trends are coming, how do we best protect students and staff. And Carrie, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you to close, and then we can ask for questions.
Okay, I'm back. I'm having computer troubles as well. Thanks. I don't need to take too much more time. I know we have a lot of questions. I think I just want to reiterate how much we depend on partnerships and are grateful for the partnerships we've already formed, and eager for more organizations and people to raise their hand and help. And finally, just imploring all of us to do everything we can to decrease COVID cases in Central Oregon so that we can get our kids back to school. So masking up and keeping physical distance, and choosing not to engage in other activities in the hopes that we can prioritize kids getting back to school.
Thanks to you both. That's a lot of information, and I'm going to attempt to launch us into the Q&A section of this. And I'm looking through, there's a few themes that I wanted to begin with to the both of you. And one of the thoughts, lots of discussion about, so what really will constitute a change in virtual to hybrid? How many times, how flexible can it be, and going back and forth? And one of those questions I'm going to send to either one of you. I'm not sure who wants to answer this, but one of the parents that's on the webinar is asking, is there a possibility that you might extend the school year in order to give an in-person experience? If we, let's say in the spring, late spring, our numbers stabilize, are we sticking with the same school year, or is there flexibility on that?
I'll start on that one. We are sticking with the same school year. One of the things that we did is that all our staff will be working. So it costs us about $500,000 a day to pay our staff. So to extend the school year, we would also need to extend that for our staff. What we would rather do with any funds that we have is think about the students who need us the most. And so if we talk about extending the school year, it would probably be looking at programs next June or the following August for our students who most need that additional support.
Okay. Do you folks have a sense of when you will be issuing schedules, especially for junior high and high school that has more complexity? When
Yeah.
will parents get that information?
Yeah, so the schools will be sending out, so you're talking about students' actual schedules.
Correct.
They should be coming out, I'm thinking about, what's today, the 20th. I would say in the next week, probably that's when parents will see schedules. I honestly don't have that exact information, but they recognize all the office staffs are back right now. They recognize that's a priority, but it's typically around the last week in August.
Okay. Next question is several, actually. Lots of questions about access to hotspots, technical difficulties with the tablets, etc. I know I, as a parent, have visited the school district website. Can you share with everyone where you go when you have questions about tech support?
Yes, we did. So last spring, one of the things we did was a parent hotline for tech support. We want to beef that up this year. That was feedback that we got, that it was too difficult. So one of the things that we're doing is creating short YouTube style videos for families about, some common problem solving in terms of iPad problems, and then having a hotline specifically for parents and students. And we're actually hiring some additional tech support to make sure that we can respond to those questions quickly. And then also working with, we have tech support in each of our schools, but also working with some of our own media specialists in schools that they could be an additional resource for students and families.
And Laura, if a family needs a hotspot, we do have them available. Who do they contact to get a hotspot?
Yes, they should. So in our back to school survey, one of the questions was, do you need internet connectivity? But if a family has not answered that, they should contact their school office. We have plenty of hotspots for everyone who needs them, for sure.
Okay. Thank you to the both of you. Let me try and assimilate a few of these questions. Lots of questions around how flexible and how agile the school district is going to be. So let me give you a scenario and maybe we can go from there. Let's say our numbers are looking good and we're going into the next 6-week decision-making format, and it's decision day for you folks. And you say, yay, we're a go, hybrid right now. And then a week later, there's an outbreak. Run through what that looks like for us.
So the state, I didn't mention the metrics for going back into distance. So once you made a decision to open, then there are also metrics for when you need to go back into a distance learning format. And it wouldn't be related to a single outbreak. It's like 2 weeks at, and I want to say it's like case count of, I'm not going to get all this right. I don't have it right in front of me, but I know for the 412, it would be 2 weeks of case counts above 20 per 100,000. So it's not a single outbreak, but it would be what happened over a couple of weeks. Once the interesting part of that question, Katie, is if they hadn't even gone to school yet, but we'd made an announcement, we do have the metric that nobody in a school community could have a positive case for 14 days. So what would probably happen is that we would have to delay the opening for that, that particular school or those particular schools, but we could move ahead with opening other schools.
And I think the only thing I would add is that we have a medical task force that is assisting the board and district in making these decisions. So we are going to start meeting with them weekly and looking over the case numbers and projections, we're trying to do the impossible, which is to balance making decisions day to day or week to week and sending people back and forth in uncertainty, but being flexible enough that we don't miss windows of opportunity to go back to school. So we're continuing to talk about that with this medical task force.
So what advice are you giving parents to prepare kids for this kind of back and forth? That's good advice. Rub your head.
Carrie, why don't you start on that one?
I think, I'm in the phase with my children, they're 2 and 4, almost 3 and 5. When you're hyper aware of whatever you project on them, they take it on fully. And I think that sometimes we forget that that's true at any age. So the best advice I have to give to parents is to project positivity and flexibility and optimism, even if that is not what you're feeling inside, and to remember that kids are way more flexible than we give them credit for, and to prepare them that things will continue to change this year and that there's not a lot of certainty. So that's my first advice.
I love that, Carrie, and I would agree with that. I was just a personal story. My granddaughter is also starting kindergarten this year and was able to go to a little camp this summer where she wore a mask every day and had to physically distance. And she said not one word about any of those things. The only thing she had to say about camp was how wonderful and fun it was, because that's what the adults working at the camp projected.
Absolutely. Yeah, my girls have been wearing masks to preschool all day for about 6 weeks now, and it doesn't impact them one bit. So we just can't forget that kids are much more flexible than we are, and we shouldn't project our frustration and uncertainty onto them.
Thank you to you both. Lots of questions about access to the tablets and technology. What year will children be able to access? Is it kindergarten and up, or is it a different?
Yeah, we're actually required in comprehensive distance learning to provide technology for every student K-12. So our K-2 iPads will have very little on them. I mean, they have to have our approved programs on them. So we have certain apps that we have approved for K-2, and then over the course of the year, if teachers find others that are applicable, but every student K-12, whether you're in Ben Alpine Schools Online or in our comprehensive distance learning model, has an iPad.
Great.
And just a quick note, we're talking about this amongst the panelists, but Laura and I are happy to respond to all of the questions and answers, even the ones we don't get to, and have the chamber send those out in an email afterwards. So please know if your question doesn't get answered today, we will follow up.
Thanks for that. There's some language that is in the Q&A session stream box that I really am not familiar with. So I'm just going to read some of these and have you guys answer it. What does CDL look like for children in IEPs? Will there be additional support for them? And can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so CDL is comprehensive distance learning, and students with IEPs means they have an individualized education plan. So they need specially designed instruction is what it's called. I briefly addressed that in talking about right now, we have to do that remotely with all students. And so that can look a lot of different ways. It might be a remote intervention group. It might be as I said, teletherapy, depending on if the student's many of our students on IEPs receive speech and language therapy. So that is done through teletherapy. It's as individual as the child, frankly. And so I think what my best advice is that at the end of the month, our teachers are back and all students on IEPs have case managers. So the person who would have the most expertise about that particular programming would be a student's case manager.
And parents will have ample access to those case managers?
Oh, yeah, those are their teachers, essentially. Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. That's helpful for me. Lots of questions now about sports.
Oh, yeah, I forgot. I'm sure there are.
Oh, yeah. And so as a parent of 2 high schoolers, I've received a little bit of information, but I know that we are waiting on more. But can you share? Let's start with fall sports.
Mhm.
Share
So-
what the plan is, please.
Yeah, so the Oregon School Activities Association, essentially what they did was condense fall, winter, spring sports into a January through June season. And so they call them season 2, which will be winter sports. Season 3 is what is now fall sports. And season 4 is spring sports, and they're truncated seasons. What I think this parent is referencing is there is a season 1, and it is entirely a local decision. Not everything is allowed, but there are, in some sports, you can actually have a competition. You could have training for a number of sports that is a local decision about whether to have a season 1. And we are, our district athletic director, Dave Williams, and our deputy superintendent and I will be meeting with other superintendents across the region next week to talk about different districts' thought. I think what I would share with the chamber is that my biggest priority is that students can get in our schools to learn. And so I have to think about anything else that we say yes to in that context, and how might that impact our ability to get to the metrics we need to get to so our students can get into schools to learn. I'm a huge promoter and believer in activities and athletics, a parent of students who actively participated when they were growing up, but I have to think about every decision with that priority in mind.
Well, okay. But totally understandable. So several questions in the queue about private schools. And I know that Cascades Academy and some other folks are really interested in participating in this discussion. Tell us about access to technology and crossover of resources and anything else you can share if your little one or big one is in a private school. How is that going to be handled? Do you have any insights on that?
Well, are you asking about opening or,
No.
or cooperation among the district and the private schools? Is that what that is asking?
They are asking about access to technology. I'm trying to find the question now. Will students at private schools be able to access special resources such as speech therapy by Zoom?
So so private schools are not required to provide those services, but we definitely have agreements. Sometimes they do, or we serve students in our schools who attend a private school. So that's probably an important individual question that I would encourage a parent to contact our special programs office about what services, if a student qualifies for an IEP, what services can be provided if a student is attending a private school, because we do have private school students who receive IEP services through the public school district.
Okay. Let's see. Skimming here. So tell us a little bit. This is several questions. I'm going to try and, well, I think this one summarizes it. If and when students return to the classroom, what kind of parameters will be in place for keeping them and the staff safe, while also making school not feel unwelcoming?
Yeah, that's a great one. And I think Carrie, so first of all, I think Carrie's reference to her daughters in preschool, my grandson happens to go to the same preschool. And I would make a strong case that that preschool has done an amazing job at following every single guideline from the state about keeping kids and families safe, and yet it being a welcoming.
They come home just as happy and excited as they ever have. They've got plastic in between them and their friends at the table. They've got masks on, they wash their hands all day long. They don't get to see friends in other classes anymore. And ultimately, they are still, learning and as happy as ever. So we have approximately 300 pages of health and safety guidelines, I think, Laura, that we've now received from the state, all of which we will follow. They are extensive. I think it's going to be harder, honestly, on the adults, the teachers, than it will on the students. We all wish that our kids didn't have to sit apart and not touch each other, but they will be okay.
And I think that one of the primary things we've done is that we've made the decision that when students first go back, even at the elementary level, they will go back in a balanced hybrid schedule. So that keeps the number of students down. In our elementary schools, the largest class size in that model would be about 13 students, because we're trying to keep the classes smaller. And so by splitting it in half, there'll be 9 to 13 kids at a time. So teachers there's plenty of room for physical distancing. There's plenty of opportunities for people, staff to supervise students to help keep them safe. And again, as Carrie said, with that calm and positive spirit, I think that I know my little kindergarten granddaughter would go to school in any way, shape, or form to just be in a live experience with others. So I think that we can provide a really wonderful experience for our students in a hybrid model.
So this goes to a couple of questions, and I'm curious, as you're talking about the small pods, there are a lot of questions about how to form a pod, what is a pod, all of that. But I find it really interesting that for years we've been talking about getting our classroom sizes smaller. And with the K-3 experience of maybe being in schools when the rest of the kids might not, if I'm hearing you correct.
That's correct.
So as we let them go in and it's in a smaller group, it's just going to be an interesting experiment in the advantages of teaching smaller classes.
Yeah.
But in addition to that, with the hybrid format, lots of questions around, do we have access to data on how well those small groups will work and how well distance learning and virtual learning works? Do you have access to, what are the trends saying nationally? I know it was a emergency kind of a moment last spring when we had to switch over, but what's the data telling you about the efficacy of hybrid and using virtual teaching?
Oh, Katie, so you asked that question to a person who's done a doctorate. That's great. How many minutes do we have? No, so here's what I'll tell you. I actually have done a tremendous amount of reading and read a pretty significant research summary late last spring, not from the spring, just period, about remote learning. And what I would say is that we know there are students who actually thrive in a remote learning environment. And I have a cousin whose fourth grade son has ADHD, and he did great in that environment because of the flexibility, not the stress of all the other students. But there is no research that says remote learning works for young children. Probably the earliest age where we have a body of research that would support it would be high school age students. And again, there are certain profiles of learners who thrive in a remote environment, but and maybe we'll be collecting that research now, but we don't have any existing body of research that says this is an effective learning method for most younger children. And there's some really obvious reasons for that in terms of, one, learning in 3 dimensions when you're younger, but it also takes a fairly self-motivated individual to be successful in a remote learning environment. Are there things that teachers can do to make it better for everyone? Absolutely, absolutely. And we've seen both in our own district and nationally, people who kept very high levels of student engagement throughout a distance learning environment. But obviously, it's a new enough experiment that there's not a body of research that could confirm that's going to work really well for kids.
Carrie, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of research on, as Laura said, on virtual learning for students and families who have chosen that in the past. This great experiment is that it's not families who have chosen it, it's all families. And so I find hope in the stories I've heard about families who never thought they'd do distance learning and whose students have thrived and worked on passion projects and found internships and been able to make the energy of their day work for when they're the most creative. And so I think if we tap into what students are learning about themselves and what families are learning about themselves, and to your point about smaller class sizes, try to take that into the next normal, that's where the opportunity is. I think we just have to be really clear that no matter how good the district does at providing an effective, comprehensive distance learning experience, having an adult who is available and able to help with schooling and a student who can thrive in that situation is critical. And that is what we aren't able to provide, and where our government is really falling short and putting it on families to figure out how to be the receiving end of that.
Thank you. So, so many questions here. I'm going to ask a quick answer to, there's a lot of questions around some of the electives, and I'm talking about CET and things that when you think about them, like auto and PE and all these things that we align with physicality, how do you plan on teaching that?
Yeah, actually PE I think is an easier answer than, auto shop, for example, because many of our PE teachers had wonderful programming last spring. I saw some great examples of things kids could do in their home, they could do in their own yards or in their neighborhoods. But yes, it's definitely a challenge. And we have amazingly creative teachers who will do some great things. But one of the allowable areas for this remote, limited in-person instruction is for some CTE programming. So there may be a point, even if our 412 schools aren't open every day, that we have some groups of students who could come in for, limited times to work on some of the super hands-on activities that you would see in a CTE class or a sculpture class or something like that.
Quickly, somebody named Megan is very interested in their child in sports. If your child is taking online versus CDL, are they going to be able to play sports if there are sports? If there
Absolutely. So what they do, if you're in Ben Alpine schools online, you would participate through your neighborhood school. So wherever you live, you can participate in all the extracurricular programming.
Okay. I'm going to end with acknowledging even more questions about forming pods and parents forming pods for enhanced learning with people who they've accepted into their groups. There's going to be a lot of discussion on that next on September 3rd about what that enhanced learning looks like, and some input from the early learning division from the state on what some criteria you as a parent should be thinking about if you are forming those enhanced learning pods where you're joining with other families and trying to get the kids together in small groups while they online learn together, whatever that looks like. We'll be spending a full hour on that topic, and then also what you do with the 0 through 5ers next time we meet on the 3rd of September. So I'm going to leave those, and all of these questions will go to the school district, and we'll work with them to figure out how to get them all answered. Thank you for your patience. And I apologize, I tried my best to get to all of those questions and squish them together, the ones that were thematically pretty much the same. What I want to do before thanking the both of you is to, again, go over what the schedule is for this 3-part series. So September 3rd is that gray area of small pods, of enhanced learning, of childcare for 0 through 5, its impacts on parents, on families, on educators, on the workforce and employers, and what pilot projects are in the works, and maybe some guidance from the state level on how you can form your own. And I already heard of a lot of people already getting that underway. So try to give you a little guidance as you go through that process. And then on September 10th, we have COCC and OSU Cascades, Becky Johnson from OSU and Lori Chesley from COCC talking about that fall experience for higher education students. I know that's on a lot of people's minds as well. So once again, thank you to Ben Broadband for sponsoring this 3-part series. And before I thank our 2 speakers, I also want to let folks know, if you haven't heard, if you are a small business owner of 50 FTEs, full-time equivalents or less, the Bend Chamber is going to be allocating $1 million out as grants in blocks of $5,000 to $40,000. We're going to open applications for these grants here in the next couple of weeks. They are in partnership with our friends at the City of Bend. They're pass-through dollars from the federal government, and it's fallen on the chamber to identify those in need and get that money out as effectively as we can. So be watching in the next couple of weeks for the announcement and the call for applications. We would like to get that in the hands of people who need it to keep our businesses open. I want to thank Laura Norquist and Carrie Douglas. This is hard work and it's emotionally draining and it's very difficult. And I am so glad we have caring, smart people in the 2 of you and the rest of the board and all of your people, Laura, because I know you have families in mind and you're doing the best you can and using the best practices and making stuff up as you go, but doing it in an informed manner. And we appreciate you getting the information out to us as quickly as possible and making this experience with the kids in mind first. So we thank you for your service in what you're doing for our families and our community. And thank you for being here today.
Thanks, Katie.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. So as a reminder, everyone, be safe, wear a mask, let's keep our businesses open, and let's get our schools back in session. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on September 3rd.
Thanks.